Megazones for coughs and colds, the foremost preparation for relieving the most acute catarrhal conditions. Containing benzol, which is a crude version of benzene and contains a lot of things you wouldn't want to put in your body. The company might have started in 1796, but is no longer sold in the UK. And this is not an advert for them. It's just a small parts tin. Hi and welcome back. Ollie has decided to come and spend some time with me today and get some camera time. This week I thought we'd spend a session in the Meccano workshop. After all, what's not to like about tools? At times, I think it might be a man thing, but possibly just because we're brought up around the need for tools more. But even now, I can still look at a YouTube channel where somebody is doing something and think, I need that. Okay, the last one was a trailer mounted bandsaw for cutting logs into planks. I'm not sure why I need it, but I need it. Then there's the enjoyment of new toys to play with. Like the guy turning a globe out of coloured pencils, and I want a lathe. I've used lathes before. I hate the job. Or the guy who fixes watches, and he has tools I've never seen before. Okay, maybe I have a butterfly mind and just like collecting things. Or maybe it is the inherent thing in me that just likes to know how a job is completed. That attainment of knowledge, skill and ability that has helped me to push forward with this channel. I like creating things. Sat in my workshop is a box plane, made some time before the 20th century. It is made out of wood and the blade is carbon steel. It is a pleasure to use when it is sharp. The sound it makes when it is cutting is lovely. I also have a drill press, again from the 19th century, made in cast iron. It is hand operated, but the flywheel is large enough to take a drive belt. But the adjustments are done manually by setting the machine. If you wanted something done or created in the 19th century, it was created by a highly skilled person who hadn't been to college or university, but nevertheless was trained to the highest level that was possible. A person who knew their ability and that of the machinery they used. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that modern power tools have taken the skill away from us, but they do make life a lot easier. No longer do you need to be able to cut a dovetail by hand. A router and a drig will do it for you. Nail guns, out of interest, an American invention by Morris Pinus for use in the construction of the Spruce Goose H4 Hercules, without a doubt have sped up construction of timber projects. But there was nothing nicer than the Friday challenge of who could sink a nail in the least number of blows without bending it. Loser brought chocolate biscuits in on Monday morning for the tea break. And I'm very glad of the humble power drill. The power tool did not just appear overnight though. They are a progression through different technologies until we now have bushless iron lithium powered tools that I never dreamed of 20 years ago. When lying under a car, I would wrestle with a corded angle grinder to cut through the bolts that held the exhaust clamp, normally in the middle of winter, because of course things fail when weather is at its worst. So, what are the three builds for today? The first is a bandsaw, the second a drill press, and finally a trip hammer. Each tool was a commonplace sight before the Second World War. And while they might have looked different from the real thing, in many ways the theory of how they worked was not at all different from the real prototype. The bandsaw is one of the workshop's very useful tools. To cut, it has a continuous blade that passes over 2 or more pulleys. The blade is welded in the middle, and that is the inherent weak point, the point of stress where the blade will break. Mine has long since gone to a better home, with somebody that will use it more than I ever did. The Meccano model of this is very prototypical of the early ones. Like all power tools, bandsaws made their first major appearance in the 20th century, with electric motors becoming widely available. But the first one was invented and patented by an Englishman, William Newbery, in 1809. With the daily operation of the saw, the blade flexes as it travels over the rollers. And yes, that is Ollie beating me up. He's lying over the container for the nuts, and every time I'm getting some out, I am disturbing him. While Mr. Newbery's invention worked, the joint of the blade would fail, making the idea feasible, but the operation not. It would take another 40 years and the French to solve the problem of how the blade could be welded. And like I've said before, when the French solve a problem, they do it with style and elegance. I'm more of a hit it with a hammer type of person, the big 14-pound sledgehammer in the corner type of hammer person. In 1846, Anne Pauline Crepin devised a method of welding the blade. They gave new life back to Mr. Newbery's invention. Mademoiselle Crepin has been credited with inventing the bandsaw, but I think maybe a better statement would be that she took an idea that in theory worked and revolutionised the blade. Without her input, without her dream and inspiration for design and invention, at a time when the world over women were not thought to be able to do so, is a moment of inspiration. And yet history moves on, and we lose these people with the moving of time. The role models that we should be acknowledging for their greatness are replaced by other role models that are less worthy of greatness. Moving on from the bandsaw and the French to the drill press. The Meccano drill press has an old life. It is a model that is regenerated all throughout the instruction manuals. In fact, next week's YouTube build is the 1960s version of this build. And looking at it, the build differs little in construction. The hand-operated cast iron drill press that I have is lovely, but it is relatively new considering that the drill press has been around for over 200 years. The modern electric drill press is an essential bit of equipment for anybody drilling with any form of accuracy. The marriage of the electric drill to the stand must have been amazing for early engineers. The electric drill, though, is not a new tool. It was invented in 1889 by Arthur Arnott and William Brain, 2 Australian inventors based at the time in Melbourne. Okay, this tool was not a handheld drill as we would think of one today. That didn't come in till around 1917 when Black & Decker painted it a handheld drill with trigger. The first electric industrial drill presses did not appear until 1920. The Meccano model runs from a belt drive, which at the time of this model, mid-1930s, was still in use in many workshops. An overhead drive rod would run the length of the workshop, and from that would drop down drive belts onto various machines. My great-grandfather's workshop was powered in this manner. An electric motor giving the workshop power via the overhead drive rod to lathe, drill press, etc. He was the chief engineer for a power station in Warsaw and would tinker with or repair things at home to keep his hands busy. The trip hammer is an ancient tool. For thousands of years it was operated either by water or animals, and was the essential backbone for most of our engineering leaps. It is probably the first power tool mankind ever invented. My mother, growing up, lived in Sandwell Street in Warsaw. At the top of her street was Windmill Street. It was a street which she was told not to walk along as a childhood, due to the poverty of the families that lived there and the very real risk of being attacked. What remains of the terrace of houses is now the front of a company called Lodar Limited. The other side of the street has long since disappeared with newer buildings. At the other end was a foundry, the building of which still stands today. She remembers during the Second World War the foundry running 24 hours a day, with both a drop hammer and a trip hammer operating most of the time. Their role was that of making buttons and buckles for the armed forces, amongst other brass articles. Once finished, the buckles would be stored in a brewery that was located behind her house, in a back lane between Sandwell Street and Bath Road. It is now a company called ASM Autos. When she used to walk the back lane to go or come back from school, she said that you would find the buttons and buckles lying on the side of the lane, where they had fallen out of the baskets as they were loaded onto lorries to be taken to the railway. As she would lie in bed, the slow, methodical thump, thump, thump of the drop hammer would be heard through the floor, with the more rapid tink, tink, tink of the trip hammer sounding into the night. When she first read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the thought of the dwarfs working at their forges reminded her of the sound of the hammers working in the foundry. These tool builds are great fun. The simple mechanics through to the tinkering that makes them work. And yet they would have been seen in daily life, or at least some variant of them would have been seen. But behind them is the history that ties them together. The inventors that saw a need to solve a problem, or improve working conditions, or even just make a job easier. The cast iron drill press I have is nothing more than a large, very heavy item taking up a corner of my workshop. It has at times been very useful, especially when very slow and steady is needed for a job. As I've said before, my bandsaw has gone to a friend who I know is using it a lot more than I did. And for me, the jigsaw can replace most of the jobs I used it for. But to imagine a time when you were first shown the latest tool, that point that made some worker 100 years ago say, "Ooh, I want that. I need that." And these things could be fixed. I'm about to throw out my cordless drill. The batteries have given up at last, and I have no way of replacing them. And also, after 8 years, it is very old tech. But that was the point. Technology moves on. New shiny things appear, and we want the new toys. Did some tribesman standing 2,000 years ago, watching Greeks or Romans at work, looking at a trip hammer, thinking to himself, "I need one of those. How can I explain that to the missus?" But as we move forward with the new toys, the old ways of doing things get left behind. The old skills become rarer and rarer, till in the end we can't work out how they did the things they did. We might be left with the old tools, but the knowledge of their operation has gone. After all, I have no idea whatsoever how to silver weld a bandsaw blade from 150 years ago. But not that long ago, people did know.